First comment comes from I'm a Potato Yay. I'm extremely excited for the future of Odizzle uploads. I'm very grateful for that. My question for you would simply have to be inquiring on your opinion of how Charles Muntz's development into the twisted, obsessive legacy chaser he becomes deters his path from that of an innocent traveler focused on exploration, and how this reflects Carl's, not Charles's, juxtaposed path of discontinued adventures in the hit movie Up from Pixar Animations. Thank you for your time. We are going to put a pin in that one. We'll come around to that one, because that's a very thought-provoking question. Next comment comes from... Fuck. Alright, let's talk about Up. This is a great movie, very thought-provoking question, and you're basically asking me to analyze the fundamental thematic material of Up, which is a bit of a challenge, but I'm actually excited to do this because if you know anything about me, I actually love movies and stories. I love watching like videos of people like analyzing movies and narratives, and this can kind of be my first attempt at doing anything like that. I'm probably not going to do a very good job, but I'm going to try. I have a little notepad here with a lot of notes on it. I'm going to try to do this fast. So, movie is Up, came out in 2009, 13 years ago, which is nuts. Carl is the main protagonist, and Charles Muntz ends up being the primary antagonist. Charles Muntz is Carl's childhood hero. So pitting them against each other is kind of an interesting decision, and they're obviously, supposed to be reflections of one another. And their purpose and journey through Paradise Falls is really the thematic backbone of the whole movie. And I think if I had to boil down the theme of Up into one word, it would be what is it about? I would say it's about ambition. And ambitions are, tied to role models, heroes, father figures, parents in general, what they mean to us, and what our relationship with them, how it manifests in our lives. Exploring themes of ambition poses the question, what actually matters to us? What do we care about? And how does that change as we get older? What stays the same? The themes in the movie sprout from the decisions and epiphanies of these two characters as they journey through Paradise Falls. Let's break down the characters. Let's start with Charles Muntz. He's a famous explorer. He flies on a blimp that's literally called the Spirit of Adventure. He accomplishes a lot. There's movies made out of him that Carl watches. But he kind of becomes a slave to his ambition and his drive to just keep on achieving more and more, accolades. And he fabricates a skeleton of this exotic bird. And the scientific community catches up to him. He's disgraced, and he basically exiles himself to Paradise Falls to find this bird, to prove everybody wrong. And it's this sort of unattainable goal for him. But he doesn't know what to do other than that. So he goes and does it anyway. Charles has lived the life that Carl really wants to live. He's a kid and he's watching these videos of this grand adventurer being a pioneer and living a big consequential life and doing big things. And as a kid, that's really what you want to do. You never dream bigger than when you're a kid. And this dream, our own personal dreams does for all of us, this dream propels him through his life and leads to what is, I think, the most consequential distinction between Carl and Charles, is that Carl meets Ellie. And they share this spirit of adventure. And they spend their time looking at the clouds, dreaming of going to Paradise Falls and starting a family. But, life keeps, getting in the way. And they never actually achieve any of it. But despite this, it's instead of growing up into these cool adventurers, they grow up into, normal people. And their simple life together becomes what's most precious to them. And so when Ellie passes away, Carl is naturally very depressed and bitter and has really lost the central thing of his life, which was his relationship with Ellie. And I love the prologue of this movie because all of the themes of the movie are expressed in just a couple of minutes, in a very emotionally resonant way with very little dialogue. It kind of ends on a more tragic note. And the main story of Up is basically a retelling of these themes in just a higher resolution, from a slightly different perspective, and ends on a brighter note. Carl sets off on his adventure to achieve this dream of him and Ellie to plop their house on the edge of the cliff in Paradise Falls. And it doesn't go off without a hitch, of course, because otherwise there wouldn't be a movie. He finds himself in the company of Russell, this kid, which, very obvious metaphor there, like he's off trying to achieve his goals, and then all of a sudden this kid kind of pumps the brakes on it, which is true for everybody. It's not always like accidental like it is in this movie, although sometimes it is. Being responsible for children often gets in the way of people's personal goals, not always to their dismay, but it does. Doug, the dog, I just recently, today, found out that Doug is spelled D-U-G instead of D-O-U-G for this character, which I think is really funny. And Kevin, the big bird that Charles Muntz has been after. Carl sees them as hindrances to his goals initially, but obviously he, changes his tune on that. Let's talk about Kevin for a second, because Kevin is basically the embodiment of like life's goals. He's this elusive being that Charles has spent basically the majority of his life chasing to no avail. And it just presents itself to Russell, the child, and he brings it to Carl and Doug. And, there's another metaphor for you. The sort of grand trophy of life, so to speak, it kind of presents itself, and Carl doesn't really see it as that. But it just kind of happens. And that's obviously kind of a metaphor for, life and the ultimate theme of this movie. And Carl learns that Kevin's life is what has value, whereas Charles just wants to hunt Kevin and, taxidermy it and make it a trophy, which is another like metaphor. Charles has all these taxidermied animals, which kind of, are like these milestones that he's achieved. But they're these like static objects that don't really do anything, and in a greater way lose their meaning because they're not living anymore. Along the way, Carl meets Charles. They meet each other, and this initially really excites Carl because it's his childhood hero, but obviously, he meets him and he learns that Charles isn't what he hoped he was. This is a very well-known phenomenon that boils down to the phrase, never meet your heroes. Most of us won't meet our heroes. If you have like a person that's your hero, they might be fictional, they might be long dead, they might just be out of reach because, maybe they're a celebrity or something. So most of us won't really ever meet our heroes, so this phrase doesn't really apply to us, but this sort of thing that happens manifests in most people's lives in the form of parents. You reach an age where you realize your parents aren't as infallible as you thought. They aren't always able to protect you. Maybe sometimes like you realize they're the ones that are kind of hurting you in some way. They make mistakes and they don't know everything. This is a tough thing to contend with when you grow up because heroes and parents both serve as role models. They used to be this thing, this object, this living representation of what you should hope to be. And the lesson really boils down to heroes are always fictional. There are people in real life who are so cool that we call them heroes, but what they mean to us and how we relate to them is really artificial. But that's the point. They're this kind of idyllic thing. They're this impossible like singularity that we point at and we aim at, and we use it to orient ourselves in the vast expanse of ways that you can live. We point at a thing and we go like, okay, I want to be something like that, and we go. And that's really useful. That's why fiction is so important, I think, is that they make these heroes, and even though they're not real, they serve as like, a point that you can aim at And even though you're never going to be Spider-Man, you could still be something like him, maybe. I don't know. As a side note, there's this quote from George R.R. Martin, the writer of, the Game of Thrones novels, criticizing Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien, which, if you know me, I don't take criticism of Lord of the Rings very lightly. But there's this quote where he's basically accusing Tolkien as being like overly simplistic and oversimplifying like the nitty-gritty of his fantasy world. And the quote is like, what was Aragorn's tax policy, and like how did he actually be a good king? And this to me is like one of the most embarrassingly stupid things a writer of fiction could say, because him asking that question to me proves that he doesn't actually understand the whole point of fiction. The Lord of the Rings isn't meant to be a logistical breakdown on how to rule a fictional kingdom in a fictional world with fictional problems that don't happen in the real world. That would be the most useless, boring, and meaningless book that in existence. The point of the story isn't even about Aragorn being a king. It's just his, whatever. That is a tangent. All of that is to say, a lesson we all learn is that heroes are really fictional, and it can be a painful lesson to learn, but the important thing to take away from it is that even though they aren't real, you still need them. The other big moment is when Carl sends Doug and Russell and Kevin away. He's basically like, I don't care about you guys. I just want to do my thing. I want to achieve this goal and get lost. And he drags his house to the spot he wants to put it down. He does it. He gets his armchairs out. He sits down and he realizes that achieving his dream really doesn't have any meaning when he doesn't have Ellie to share it with, and that his relationship with his wife is really what fueled that dream. And now that he's there, he sees that this was just an arbitrary goal that he set up, and it's kind of meaningless. I forgot to mention that Carl actually sits down and reads Ellie's adventure book that she's had since she was a kid, and he reads through the section labeled Stuff I'm Gonna Do, and unbeknownst to him, she's been scrapbooking all the photos and memories of their time together, and it's a very emotional moment for him and the audience, might I add. It's very hard to get through without crying, even for me. And and she signs it, thanks for the adventure. Now go have a new one. Love, Ellie. This obviously inspires him to save Russell and Kevin, and because those are the relationships he made on the way, which is kind of the big message of the movie, I think. There's a really sweet scene where Doug shows up on his porch because he never left. He was under his porch the whole time. It's obviously a very good dog moment, but also I think it's a good representation of a good friend, a good loyal friend. And just like you learn that your heroes aren't perfect, you shouldn't expect your friends to be perfect either. And you would hope that even when you make mistakes or you treat your friends poorly than you should, you hope that they weather the storm and still will be there for you, and that you'll still be there for them if they make those mistakes. It's a very nice thing. So Carl saves the day, and Charles Muntz falls to his death while trying to shoot Kevin with a gun. In the end, Carl, Russell, and Doug, they let Kevin go. They meet her little babies. It's very cute. And they walk off, and then they fly away on the Spirit of Adventure, the blimp that Charles rides with all of his dog servants. And they go to Russell's little badge ceremony, and Carl shows up instead of his dad because his dad doesn't show up, but Carl shows up and he gives him the Ellie badge, which if you watch that scene and you don't really feel it in your soul, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you don't have one. It ends with the epiphany that it's not about, making it to these milestones. It's about the journey, and it's about not being obsessed with achievement and just savoring what happens along the way. And really, especially in regards to your interpersonal relationships. And so that's what I think of. Let me read the comment. That is my opinion on how Charles Munt's development into the twisted, obsessive legacy chaser he becomes deters his path from that of an innocent traveler focused on exploration, and how it reflects Carl's, not Charles's, juxtaposed path of discontinued adventures in the hit movie Up from Pixar Animations. That is my opinion. I hope you enjoyed it. This is going to be such a long video. And that concludes the 10 subscriber special Q&A. The final part of the 10 subscriber anthology is coming up. Stay tuned for it. It's gonna be pretty sweet. And I'll see you guys next time. What's up, gamers? Alright, just a quick little additional bit here at the end of the video. The next video is going to be a food review, and so sort of to, lube up the tracks for that video, I figured I'd talk about something I found today. A little bit about me. I'm an enjoyer of dried fruit. I'm also an enjoyer of Trader Joe's, and usually when I go to Trader Joe's, I get their dried mango. But I went there today. I walked there, and they didn't have, that's an unimportant detail, but they didn't have dried mango, if you can believe it. But what they did have was this. They had, it's, I already opened it, obviously, sorry. I would have bought a second one if I knew I was going to do a stupid ass review of it. These little, like, dried mango little snack things. And I was like, oh, I like those. I thought it would be like a little pouch of like, it says like dried fruit buttons or whatever. So I thought there'd just be like little bowls of dried fruit. And I was like, oh, that sounds all right. It's not that at all. What it is surprised me quite a lot. So here, let me put it back in the thing for full immersion. So you open up the package and you pull this out, folded like thin paper, kind of like a fruit roll-up. And so initially I thought, oh, is this gonna be like a fruit roll-up kind of thing, except it's like a fruit fold-up? It's not that. It's I've eaten most of them because they are quite tasty, but this is what they are. They are little dots of like dried fruit, like whatever the hell they make it. I imagine that they have just like a boiling cauldron of like dried mango concentrate and sugar and whatever the hell else they put in there. Gelatin, maybe? I don't know. Pectin? Maybe? And then they just kind of like squirt it out onto a paper and it dries, and that's why it looks like this. I, started digging in and it tastes fine, but the eating experience is remarkable. And not necessarily in a good way, not necessarily in a bad way, but it is notable. So what you do is you peel off this thing from the paper, and the texture, I wish you could hold this. It is the most interesting blend of a Band-Aid and a scab. And taste like dried fruit, and they taste good. It's good. It's like fruit leather. I love fruit leather. Slaps. And I thought when I started eating this, I couldn't believe that they made something like this. I was like, this is so odd. This literally is like eating a scab and eating a Band-Aid at the same time. And then I realized that it's quite an interesting niche to operate in, because while I am not in this demographic, there are people who, have the habit or the compulsion to eat scabs, pick scabs and eat them. I don't get wounded very often, so I don't really have scabs. But, as a kid, I'd pick my scabs. Everybody did, and if you say you don't, you're a liar. And, these are like 60 cents. So if you are a, someone who is fighting the urge constantly to pick and eat their scabs, this is the snack for you, and you are also an enjoyer of mango. This will service you perfectly. Pretty good. And one of the most interesting snacks I've ever gotten from Trader Joe's. Thought-provoking. That's it. Food reviews coming up very, very soon. And I figured I'd just throw this in because I got this snack and I had to tell someone about it. Have a good night.